Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Today on the Newscast, Russia is vowing to supply the Iranian regime with advanced weapons. Why would Russia do this, and what does it mean for the Middle East and for the world? Get all the breaking details coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. Russia's ambassador to Iran said this week that Russia is very open to selling advanced weapons to the Iranian regime. Now, the Russian ambassador was speaking in particular about October 18th, just a little over 1 week away. On that date, a UN arms embargo against the Iranian regime will be lifted, and Russia's ambassador to Iran said that on October 19th, the very next day, Russia will be open for business in terms of selling advanced weapons systems to the Iranian regime, the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism. Folks, this is a very dangerous situation, obviously, one you're probably not hearing about in the mainstream media, but we've got the inside story for you today right here on the Watchman Newscast. Before I get into it, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We are bringing you the kind of cutting-edge, timely information that you just won't hear anywhere else, certainly not in the mainstream media. Okay, let's get into it. Russia saying that the S-400 anti-aircraft missile system is on the table and available to the Iranian regime. Russia is willing to sell this advanced anti-aircraft missile system to the Iranian regime. Obviously, a very dangerous situation. As I said at the top, the Russian ambassador to Iran again said, hey, nothing is stopping us, nothing is holding us back. We will do business freely and willingly and gladly with the Iranian regime. This is no surprise, really, in the grand scheme of things, folks. If you look at it, Russia right now is helping Iran to build nuclear reactors. So there is a long history of cooperation between these two nations, which is interesting because historically they were at each other's throats in past centuries, but today in 2020, they are cleaving closer and closer together. More on that in a minute, but why would this sale of the S-400 anti-aircraft missile system to the Iranian regime be so troublesome? Number one, two main reasons come into my mind right away, folks. Number one, for years, there has been talk of Israel or the United States possibly having to take action against Iran's nuclear weapons sites, their nuclear weapons program on Iranian soil. Iran continues to forge ahead, as we've talked about here many times here on the Newscast. Iran continues to forge ahead with that illicit nuclear weapons program. If it gets to a certain point, and they are not far from breakout and crossing that threshold, we've heard many reports saying that Iran, if it so chooses, in the matter of months, could have the bomb. So if Israel, the United States, the West, I say the West, although I'm not counting on Europe to do anything, but if they make a decision that this is an existential threat, obviously both Israel and the Trump administration have said, hey, we will not let the Iranian regime go nuclear. Say they want to take out those nuclear facilities in Iran, and all of a sudden that job becomes a lot harder because Iran has this advanced anti-aircraft missile system known as the S-400, which Russia is very willing to sell to the Iranian regime. So the United States obviously not happy about this. Europe is pretty mum about it. Europe, I'm sure, is not happy about it, but they have shown again and again they're not willing to put their necks on the line and stand in the gap and take a tough stance against the Iranian regime. As a matter of fact, Europe is trying desperately to keep together the Iran nuclear deal, the disastrous Iran nuclear deal, which thankfully President Trump pulled out of in May 2018. It was originally signed in July 2015, and Europe is trying desperately to keep that alive. They don't want to put any additional pressure on the Iranian regime. Meanwhile, the United States is tightening sanctions against the Iranian regime. Iran is hurting. Economically, the sanctions are biting. They're having a great effect, but Europe is saying, you've gone too far. We'd rather appease this regime. So the U.S. and Europe at loggerheads right now. And now this UN arms embargo will be lifted again on October 18th. The United States obviously wants to keep it in place. It's trying to push the other members of the UN Security Council to keep it in place. They're not having it, sadly. Russia and China obviously want no parts of it. They want to do business with the Iranian regime, both Russia and China. And Europe is saying, hey, we need to back off. We need to be nice to the Iranian regime and give them more money and appease them, and then they'll leave us alone. History shows that never works, but Europe is determined to give it another try. So the United States says, hey, okay, if you want to do business with the Iranian regime, we will also sanction you. There is a consequence for doing business with the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, the Iranian regime. That's what the United States is saying. It's a tough battle right now, though, folks, because, again, Russia, China, and Europe have no stomach. Russia and China, not at all, obviously. They're aligned with the Iranian regime. And Europe has no stomach for tough action against the Iranian regime. So the United States and really Israel are kind of lone voices here right now against Iran, in addition to, interestingly enough, the Sunni Arab states like the UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. Isn't it fascinating, folks, how these nations get it? These are Muslim nations in the Middle East. They understand the nature of the Iranian threat, and they want to be more forceful against it, while Europe does not. What a sad state of affairs we have today in the West. But hey, thankfully, the United States, at least under the Trump administration, is standing strong. Obviously, Israel is, and we see this alliance coming together. We've talked about it many times here on the newscast, with Israel and the Sunni Arab nations aligned against that Iranian axis. Now, when you're aligning against the Iranian axis today, and when I talk about the Iranian axis, I'm talking about the Iranian regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also in Gaza along with Hamas, and these radical Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and of course, the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. That's what they call the resistance axis. That's what Iran calls it. Also, throw in the mix the Houthis in Yemen. Now, when you talk about that Iranian axis today, sadly, in many ways, you kind of have to group Russia into that mix. Look, Russia obviously operates independently, does their own thing, but Russia is aligned with the Iranian axis in Syria. There's no question about it, folks. Number one, Russia is in Syria to stay. They're not going anywhere. When they entered Syria in September 2015, some said, well, it's just a temporary thing, then Russia's going to pull right out. No way. Russia is looking to reestablish, and Vladimir Putin is looking to reestablish the Soviet Empire. You would think at the end of the day that supporting Iran, supporting a jihadist regime, an Islamic jihadist regime, would be a real contradiction for Russia that doesn't really line up with their interests. Think about it. In places like Chechnya over the past 2 or 3 decades, Russia has fought, not recently, Chechnya is now in the Putin orbit, but in the past, Russia has had major troubles with Islamic insurgents, both in Chechnya, obviously, to Russia's south, and in Russia itself, and in Moscow. We've seen terror attacks carried out by Sunni Islamic jihadists. At the end of the day, the Iranian regime and Hezbollah, that axis of Shia terror, and the likes of ISIS and Al-QAEDA and the Sunni terror wing and the Muslim Brotherhood, they are two sides of the same coin. Obviously, major theological differences, Sunni, Shia, a different eschatology for both camps, but really they want the same thing at the end of the day. They want global domination. They want the revival of the caliphate. They do not like the West, and they want the destruction of Israel and really the non-Islamic world. They want to subjugate to their radical rule. So it's no wonder that ISIS and the Iranian regime were fighting each other over the past few years. They both want the same thing. They're both vying for power. So when you look at Russia aligning itself with the Iranian regime and in many ways with Hezbollah even in Syria, look, Russian troops are shoulder to shoulder with Iranian troops and Hezbollah on the battlefields of Syria, conceivably, I suppose, sharing intelligence and other vital, important information. You would think, hey, Russia, this is very short-sighted, because if Iran could, if it was strong enough, it would have a bullseye on Russia's back as well as it already has on Europe and the United States and Israel. Remember, The Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979 made very clear that the Iranian Revolution was not limited to Iran. He had a global vision. He saw it as a global revolution. And by the way, he was none too fond of Soviet Russia. But we have this alliance today clearly between Russia and Iran and Turkey. I mentioned a minute ago, just as Russia wants to stake a major claim in the Middle East once again, like it had in the Soviet days, the heyday of Russian power, at least in the modern era. Turkey, obviously, we've talked about this many times here in the newscast. Recep Erdogan, the Turkish president, wants to revive the Ottoman Caliphate. He sees himself as a modern-day caliph. And Iran wants to recover that territory it once ruled under the Persian Empire, the mighty Persian Empire, centuries and centuries, some 2,500 years ago. So these three actors, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, have competing interests in many ways, whether it's Syria, whether it's the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, which is really being stirred up right now. So they are competing in some ways, Iraq as well to an extent, but their interests diverge in other ways. The front against the West. At the end of the day, when Russia says, look, we'll deal with Iran, and we'll have Hamas visit us in Moscow, Hamas leaders, an element of this is clearly Russia thumbing its nose at the West and the United States in particular. They're saying, hey, Iran, you're an enemy of the United States. The United States is a competitor, an adversary of ours in many ways. So we'll embrace you. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it's just kind of old-fashioned power politics as well, in a sense, with Russia. But again, I believe that it is very short-sighted for Russia. But the alliance is coming together more and more. Russia, Turkey, Iran, again, not always agreeing, and sometimes at each other's throats over certain issues. But we've seen over the past few years Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, Erdogan, the Turkish president, and the Iranian president, Rouhani, meeting together, holding their arms together, skyward in victory, meeting together in various capitals in their respective countries as that alliance grows closer, this anti-Western front. And obviously, if you're a biblical prophecy watcher like I am, everyone has different interpretations, obviously, of biblical prophecy, but many see this blossoming alliance between Russia, Turkey, and the Iranian regime as a prophetic sign. In particular, the book of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, this coming war of Gog and Magog. Many believe that Russia, Iran, and Turkey will head up this invasion force that will head towards the mountains of Israel. So we are keeping a close eye on what's happening there with Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and these Russian arms sales potentially to the Iranian regime. And remember, folks, not only Russia, but Europe and other nations, they don't want consequences here in terms of, okay, the United States says, now we're going to sanction you. You want to send advanced arms to the Iranian regime, here come the sanctions. What they may do is wait it out until November 3rd. Obviously, here in the United States, we have an election on November 3rd. The bad guys might be looking for a different result than having the Trump administration in office. The Trump administration, obviously, which has been very tough on Iran, and rightly so, deserve a lot of credit for that. So the bad guys might be waiting this out. If President Trump lost on November 3rd, a Biden-Harris administration, I can assure you, would have a much different strategy when it comes to the Iranian regime. You'd want to rewind probably to 2015, what we saw under the Obama presidency, where Joe Biden was the vice president, and that is when the Iran nuclear deal was struck. What a Biden administration would look to do would be to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal and strike a much more friendlier tone towards the mullahs. I think that would be disastrous. But the players in the region, all the relevant players in the region, near the region, whether it's Europe or Russia, China, they're all looking on to see what happens, obviously, on November 3rd, as are we. So, man, never a dull moment in the Middle East, the world's most important, most chaotic, most volatile and strategic region where all the world's power players want a piece of the pie. We'll continue to bring you breaking updates right here on The Watchman. Before we go, two things. Remember to subscribe. I mentioned it at the top. I'll mention it again. Just click that subscribe button and the notification bell so you get alerts every time we post a new video here on the newscast or clips from our Watchman TV show, which you can see every week on TBN. Lastly, I want to mention also, remember the great partnership we have right now with our good friends at ARTSA. Go to artsabox.com. You see the information there on your screen. That's www.artsabox.com. Use the discount code Watchman15. We had the unboxing here on the newscast a few weeks ago. A lot of fun. ARTSA is bringing you incredible Israeli-made products from Israeli artisans in these beautiful boxes that they are shipping to you. And inside you will find a taste of Israel. Right now, many of us can't get to the Holy Land, obviously. I'm there every few months. I'm very fortunate in that regard, but because of the travel restrictions, COVID-19, I have not been able to go as of late. But maybe you've never been to Israel, or maybe you went once and you're dying to get back, but you just haven't been able to. ARTSA Boxes, and it's a subscription-based deal where you get a box. It's a seasonal deal where you get a box every few months. Right now, the offer is from Nazareth. Christmas time will be Bethlehem, perfect, right? Then Jerusalem, then Galilee as the year goes on. But sign up, and every few months you will get one of these wonderful boxes from ARTSA with a taste of Israel inside. And the best thing about it is these are Israeli-made products, genuine, authentic, and they are made by Israeli businesses and small business owners. So you are fulfilling that biblical mandate, Genesis 12:3, to bless Israel. Especially right now. Look, Israel's under lockdown, pretty severe due to COVID-19. The Israeli economy has taken a major hit, so you are blessing Israel and the Jewish people by supporting Israeli businesses and buying an ARTSA box. We only partner with companies we believe in here on the Watchman newscast that are blessing Israel and blessing the body of Christ, and I believe that ARTSA is doing both. So again, it's artsabox.com, www.artsabox.com, and use the discount code Watchman15. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today on the Watchman newscast. We will continue to keep an eye on all of these breaking events around the world that are receiving scant coverage, to say the least, in the mainstream media. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.